think you should just go. I can't find.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Power of Food podcast, episode 4 of season 2. Stacy and I are here, and we are so excited to be back after a little hiatus. We've both been very busy. So we're so excited about today's podcast. We're going to be talking all about calories and weight loss and why you might have heard that, the calories in, calories out model is a little bit outdated. So we're going to talk about weight loss and, maintaining weight and a lot of the factors that go into that, which are much more complex than that calories in, calories out model. All calories are not created equal. So we're going to touch on that and touch on some of the body systems that if there's some kind of weight imbalance that we want to look to and see if we can correct those imbalances and then allow the body to come into balance. And with that often comes the shedding of excess weight if there is weight to be lost. So you want to jump right in, Stacy?
Yes, absolutely. It's so great to be back, to be here and talking about this awesome topic. Because I do have a lot of people that say, well, these are how many calories I'm eating every single day, constantly trying to cut back on their calories, and they're thinking I'm just not losing weight. And there's so many factors that are included in why somebody would be not able to lose weight or losing too much weight, that have really nothing to do with the number of calories that they are eating in a day. So I'll just get started with my number one here, and that is hormone balance. I think one of the most important aspects about understanding hormone balance is that we are not just talking about the sex hormones. When we say hormones, immediately people think estrogen, testosterone, like those are the main hormones that we think about. However, there are so many different hormones, and hormones all act together in kind of like an orchestra. And when one is a little bit off, then another one gets affected. And if we look at this broader picture of hormones and think about, we actually have hormones that tell us when we are hungry and when we are satisfied. And we even have hormones that decide when blood sugar is going to move into your cells or stay in your blood. We have hormones that affect the way that we metabolize food and then use them for fuel. So when I'm talking about hormone balance, I'm thinking very broadly about many, many different hormones that most people are not familiar with, other than the estrogen and testosterone and the sex hormones that we often talk about. And that's where you may need to work with, a healthcare professional to really understand, how is your insulin hormone working? How is the hormone that tells you when you're full working? There's a reason why some people are just feeling like they can eat, more food than most or constantly hungry throughout the day, whereas some people feel full after just a few bites of food. And those are the hormones that we have to look at and make sure that they are working efficiently and all in this combined balance in order to understand, that your metabolism is working efficiently and you are eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're full, and being able to get through several hours in between meals without even eating at all. All of those are things that rely on a healthy hormone balance. So that's something to really investigate that is has nothing to do with the number of calories that you eat. It's whether or not your body actually knows how to use those calories to burn, fat for fuel and metabolize everything appropriately.
Yeah, I love that description, and especially the hormones acting like an orchestra or a symphony. They're all working together and they're kind of like messengers in the body. So anytime we have some kind of imbalance, we have to look a bit upstream and think about, like, why do we have that hormonal imbalance in the first place? And our hormones, like you said, are more than just our sex hormones. So yes, things like estrogen dominance, for example, which a lot of women deal with, that can in and of itself trigger weight gain, especially like in the hips and the thighs. It can slow metabolism. So it makes it even harder to lose weight, even if, someone's cutting calories and working out more, and that might be, just contributing to their problem. So definitely looking at the sex hormones is helpful, especially like testosterone, DHEA. Sometimes if women have lower levels, it can be hard to maintain muscle mass, which we'll talk about in a bit. Also why for men who typically have higher levels of those male, quote, sex hormones, women and men have them, it can be a bit easier for them in general to shed excess pounds. And the other one I just wanted to mention, which I see so often, is cortisol. So cortisol is our stress hormone. So many people come to me so stressed out, right? Like we live in a stressful society. Everyone's always stressed out all the time. And cortisol can really trigger erratic blood sugar, high insulin levels, all of which can increase your fat storage, especially in your abdomen. So if you're someone who carries a lot of excess weight in your abdomen and you're hyper stressed out all the time, that could be in part why. Until you, again, get to the root cause and address that stress, it's going to be really hard to shed those pounds. So just wanted to mention that because cortisol I see so much as dysregulated in people. But it's really nice to look at a full hormone panel. And like you said, Stacey, work with someone who understands these hormones, do some hormonal testing, and then we can really see what's going on and address the issue from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we see a lot of these issues in menopausal women who are losing their estrogen. And we're also, it's so common now to see these younger girls with a diagnosis called PCOS that is also related to high estrogen and high testosterone. But one thing I'm not sure if people are familiar with is that all of the pollutants in the air and things that we get when we use plastics too much or unsafe cleaning, materials or personal self-care products, those actually act like hormones in the body. So that's why they're called something called endocrine disruptors. And even an easy step is to just try starting to cut back on our usage of plastics and using more safe cleaning supplies and personal care products to avoid that hormone imbalance is just one easy step to get started. I shouldn't say easy because it could be pretty overwhelming, but little by little, it creates some good benefits.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because that is often not talked about, those synthetic estrogens or xenoestrogens, and those can really contribute to that excess estrogen. And then also we have to look at, someone's detoxification ability. So you could be making a normal amount of estrogen, but if you're not actually detoxing what you don't need and you're not going to the bathroom every day with a full bowel movement at least once a day, you could still be having, excess estrogen. And then also like looking at it as multiple hormones. If your progesterone is too low and your estrogen is quote normal, that can still be like estrogen dominance. So it's not just looking at that estrogen level. So that's kind of what we mean when we say this is very complex. There's a lot of moving parts. And so looking at it can be really helpful.
Right. And then again, with hormones, another one that we don't all think about right away is the thyroid. Those are hormones too. The thyroid are releasing hormones that are some of the most crucial hormones for our metabolism. So I think a lot of people are familiar with the fact that if you have Hashimoto's or low thyroid, then your metabolism is going to slow down. So that's another great hormone panel to obtain to really understand if your thyroid is working efficiently. One thing that I recommend here is really seeking out somebody who can tell you the entire thyroid panel for which to receive. A lot of times doctors will only order just the one hormone, the TSH, which is something a lot of people are familiar with. However, they're missing the other components of that panel. So the TSH is just the hormone, let's say, that the brain uses. But then there's a hormone in the thyroid itself. And then that hormone has to actually get converted to an active hormone. So understanding each step of that pathway is very important to really gathering the information you need with regards to the efficiency of the thyroid.
Yeah, thyroid is huge. So, like you said, when the thyroid's making less hormones, your metabolism slows down. You're not going to burn off calories as quickly. You're more likely to gain weight. And so, like you said, Stacey, getting a full thyroid panel. So that's something I always say to my clients, like advocate for yourself with your doctor, especially if your doctor is not trained in functional medicine or isn't an ND. If they're more conventionally trained and they're, taught to just look at TSH, that is just a tiny, tiny part of the full picture. And on top of that, a lot of doctors only look at, this wider range. So the range that's just okay versus what we call optimal range, which is a smaller, tighter range, basically, where it's, the number that you should be so you feel amazing, so that you feel good and you're functioning optimally versus, just getting by, which is what a lot of those numbers are in those reference ranges when you, go to your doctor, get your yearly labs, that kind of thing. So that's why it can be really beneficial to work with someone like Stacey and myself or someone else trained in functional medicine that can look at those numbers and tell you, okay, maybe you're not outside of that range that conventional medicine says is okay. But, if your numbers are not within the optimal range, then it might be worth looking into a little bit more. And then just going back to like the hormones, like the estrogen, for example, if there is estrogen dominance, that can actually like inhibit and block the delivery of those thyroid hormones to the cells that it needs. And that can also contribute to weight gain. So even if the thyroid gland in and of itself is acting okay, it could be those hormones coming into it again. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit about the thyroid.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking about while you were talking is how important it is for us to listen to our bodies. So, because if your doctor is only ordering the TSH and that seems to be normal, but you are experiencing fatigue, weight gain, coldness all the time, hair loss, other symptoms that are just not normal for you, then that's where you have to tell your doctor this is not normal. It's like kind of like those cartoons that we see where you go to the doctor and you have like you're breaking out in a rash all over you, but because the numbers on your blood panel look good to the doctor says, well, you're just fine.
Right.
I'm not fine. Your body, so please listen to your body is the best indicator of everything that is going a little off. And that's where, like you said before, you can advocate for yourself when something is not normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And another one that I often see with hypothyroid is constipation. I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's another one that can be a big side effect of that. Yeah. So genetics can also play a role. So our genetics, it's not everything, right? So our environment has a large, large role. But genetics do play a small part in, how we gain weight, where we store weight, our metabolism, all of these things. So even going as far back as like, what your mom ate, when she was growing up and what she ate when you were in her, in her belly, like all of that can play a role into what your metabolism is, how you gain weight later in your life. So again, looking upstream can be really important. So genetics plays a large role as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually have genes that decide how many calories we are going to burn when we are at rest and how many calories we are going to burn when we exercise. Some people burn almost nothing, even when they're exercising. So that's what learning about your genetics, if you have the type of genetics that there's a little bit of a slower burn of calories, either while you're at rest or even when you're at exercise, we can start to learn what we need to do, what sort of extra vitamins you might need to take in order to speed up that process, in order to make your metabolism go a little more efficiently while you're exercising. There are some people with the genetics to say that you're going to burn more calories when you do endurance exercise versus another person whose genes say, no, 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 you're going to burn more calories when you're lifting weights. So that alone, that kind of insight into your body is especially healthy or helpful when figuring out, well, what do I need to do to make this more efficient? Some people just need a little more recovery in between their exercising. And that's something that shows in our genes. Even the things that I was talking about before about the hormones that either tell us when we're satisfied or tell us when we're hungry. Some people genetically have the hormones that will just make you hungry all the time versus the genes that say, no, no, you're going to feel full all the time. So it's very helpful to understand what genetics you have and then figure out, and usually where I know we're able to do this is understand maybe you just need a little more B6, like the vitamin B6 in order to make your metabolism move a little faster or in order to make you feel full more often. And all of that is related to the genetics.
Yeah, I love genetics too because it just goes against the one size fits all model that so often people try to simplify nutrition and simplify health and try to say, well, everyone should be eating this way or everyone should be taking this supplement. And it's just so wrong. Yes. So really diving deep into your genetics, figuring out your unique individualized needs and going from there can be really helpful. So love looking at genetics, especially when we're talking about weight gain, weight loss, because people can get so frustrated, right? They see like their friend, their neighbor doing this thing, they do the same thing and they don't get the results and they're like, why? And it's not willpower. It's not that you're not like doing enough. There's so many different factors, which is why I'm so glad we're talking about this. So genetics is super interesting. Another one is inflammation. So this is a big one. Many people deal with chronic underlying inflammation, and weight gain is associated with inflammation in the body. So fat cells actually secrete inflammatory molecules in the body. Inflammation can also contribute to insulin resistance. So we talked a little bit about insulin. Insulin is released when blood glucose rises. So that can lead to weight gain. And then it's kind of a vicious cycle, right? Because weight gain causes more insulin resistance and insulin resistance leads to more weight gain. So it's really important to get that blood sugar regulated. So we're not, contributing to that inflammation and that insulin resistance. Interestingly, leptin, which Stacey talked about earlier, which is the hormone that makes us feel full, right? So that's the hormone where you eat a meal, you're like, okay, I feel good, I'm satisfied, I don't need to keep eating, I don't overeat. Inflammation can actually interfere with your body's response to leptin, which is really interesting. So again, like if your brain isn't receiving that signal, then you might be eating more than you really need to. So that can definitely be a driver of weight gain for people. And lastly, just inflammation in and of itself makes the body stressed and irritated, right? It's not a pleasant thing for your body to be inflamed. We don't want to have chronic inflammation. Of course, acute inflammation saves our butt, whatever, but like chronic, which a lot of people are dealing with, the body's not going to be focused on losing weight, right? It's going to be focused on surviving and healing and getting over that inflammation versus, burning off that 10 pounds that you're trying to get off. So to lose weight, you really need to think about how do we reduce that inflammation? What are the irritants? Like what's happening and what can we do to help bring the body back into balance, back to kind of like quote normal?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, inflammation is a serious threat to the body. So that is the body's number one priority. When there is inflammation, whether it's from an infection or an injury or eating the wrong diet or having some nutrient insufficiencies, all of those things can cause inflammation. And when your body is threatened by inflammation, that is the top priority. And it basically says, we're going to store all these calories as fat because right now we are focused on this much more scary threat that we are dealing with. The other thing is that it puts our body in a state of fight or flight. And that's exactly like when you were saying before, cortisol does the same thing. It puts your body into this state of fight or flight. And when your body is in the phase of fight or flight, it cannot be in the state of rest and digest. So that's where we have to start shifting our body into rest and digest before and during and after our meals, or before we go to sleep, because we need to make sure our body is focused on digestion in order for metabolism to work efficiently. So absolutely, reducing inflammation, promoting a state of rest and digest are all really important if we want to be able, our bodies to be able to use calories for fuel instead of being stored for fat.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one that we wanted to touch on is lean body mass. So lean body mass is super important for increasing metabolism, burning fat, especially at a rested state. So we're not saying, work out all the time, but when you have more muscle mass, your natural metabolism is just going to be higher and you're going to naturally burn more fat. So again, I kind of mentioned this before, but if we're looking at men versus women, men typically have an easier time staying lean, losing weight. They just have more muscle. So both sexes have those hormones, but men typically have more DHEA, more testosterone, which again helps with that muscle mass. But then, as you see men aging and those hormones dropping, especially in the presence of high stress, which often happens, that's when those hormones can that metabolism can kind of nosedive, and you can kind of start to put on weight a little bit more. You're like, well, where was my body? Where's my 20-year-old body, or whatever it is? And so just keeping an eye on that. And so doing consistent weight training is really important. So doing that, not just the cardio. A lot of people think like, oh, cardio, burn fat. And yes, it can be important. But, if you have high cortisol, that's a whole nother thing. And cardio might not be the best thing for you. But weight training, resistance training, at least 3 times a week is really great for helping to boost metabolism, help with that lean body mass, and therefore, maintain or lose weight if you have weight that needs to be lost.
Yeah. And I especially want to emphasize this for postmenopausal women.
Yes.
Because that's when we really start our ability to keep muscle mass on at that point, it becomes harder and harder because of our changes in hormones. And then the other part to this is how important that lean body mass is for bone health as well. Mm-hmm. So just trying to keep our bone and our metabolism moving at an efficient pace, that's super important at that point. All right. So the next one we were thinking about discussing was nutrient sufficiency. And this is what I like about this one is that we, always when we're trying to lose weight, we think about cutting back on what we're eating and eating less and less and less. But honestly, sometimes the process of our metabolism relies on many, many different nutrients just for that process to happen appropriately. And if we keep cutting back on everything that we eat, it's very possible that we're missing out on some vitamins and minerals and other nutrients that our body actually needs for metabolism to work appropriately. So eating a nutrient-dense diet where every food you eat is packed with nutrition versus high in sugar or high in white flour and those foods that are missing nutrients. And then also eating a diet that is diverse. So we're getting different colors and different nutrients each day or few days, just to ensure that our body is getting all of the nutrients that it needs to have a healthy metabolism.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, missing those nutrients can slow down metabolism. I find that especially women, when they're trying to lose weight, they are not actually eating enough. So we'll talk about macronutrients later, but like we need to make sure we're eating enough calories, because if we're not, that in and of itself can put the body in a stress response. And we already talked about what happens with that stress response. So we want to make sure that we're nourishing ourselves with the right food. So there's nutrient dense foods, all the colors of the rainbow, nutrients, like you said, Stacey, they make us run. We need them for all of the processes in our body. They build our muscle, they build our bone, all these things we've been talking about. And then on top of that, those phytonutrients. So making sure we're getting those anti-inflammatory chemicals, which we talked about inflammation. So making sure we're getting those nutrients that help with that process is really important.
Yeah. And even just to feel satisfied.
So
yeah. That we're not constantly seeking out more and more food, more snacks. And that actually leads us to the next one, which is, I actually think that the biggest challenge that we have with weight loss is how many times during the day is insulin being triggered. So insulin is that hormone. We've already mentioned it a few times, where that is triggered when it has to move sugar into your cells. So every single time you eat a food that has sugar or carbohydrates, insulin is going to get triggered, and it tells your body, here's sugar, move it into your cells. The other thing that insulin does is it tells your body to store fat. So how many times during the day is insulin being triggered so that it is telling your body to store fat? So that's why one of the techniques that I do work on with my clients often is, how can we strategize and create a day where you are just eating your meals and avoiding snacks? Because obviously we have to eat our healthy meals, just like we already talked about, making sure they're nutrient dense and nutrient diverse. But then how can we also include 4 or 5 hours in between your meals and 10 to 12 hours over the night where you're not eating, so that we're not triggering insulin and we're not storing fat?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of those that it really depends on the person. So some people do really, really great with that. Some people, they might need to snack. And so then it comes down to, okay, how do we create a snack for you that won't spike your insulin? Yes. So let's be smart about this. So even if we're not just eating 3 straight meals, which if you're doing so, of course, you still want that to be balanced, but how can we make those snacks not spike your insulin? So how do we do that? We add protein, we add fat, and we add fiber. So having a snack with all of those things will make it so that you're getting the energy, you're getting the nutrients, but your blood sugar isn't going to freak out and your insulin isn't going to skyrocket. Whereas, if you have like a candy bar or just naked carbs, like straight carbs without a healthy fat, without the protein, without the fiber, you're going to get that. And not to mention, like, not just the insulin, but like your mood is going to suffer, your energy is going to suffer. It's not going to make you feel great. So there's numerous reasons why you want to create this healthy, balanced snack. If you are deciding, okay, snacks are best for my unique body versus, the 3 straight meals through the day.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And that's where people get a little surprised when I tell them, well, just eating a bowl of watermelon is not the best idea. Even though you're eating fruit, you think you're doing something good by choosing to have fruit, but that when you eat that type of carbohydrate all alone, it's by itself in the middle of the day, it is going to trigger that insulin. So what can we add to that snack? Like you said, with fat. So maybe we're adding nuts or nut butter or some avocado, or I'm not saying that that's a great combination with watermelon.
Avocado and watermelon?
Yes, sounds so good. But adding sources of fat to the fruit that you're eating, will absolutely sort of slow down that insulin trigger, so that it's not as impactful and not as strong as it would be if you were eating fruit by itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So our last one that we wanted to touch on are macronutrient ratios. So for those of you who don't know what macronutrients are, it's just your fat, your protein, your carbs. So really simple. But these ratios, it really depends on you and your unique body, what they should be. So some people do better with a higher fat diet and lower carbohydrate diet and moderate protein. Other people might actually do well with a high carb diet, lower fat, moderate protein. So it really depends. And this is where the genetics can be really interesting and insightful and help you figure out, okay, what should my ratios be? It's very likely that if you're eating, a standard American diet, you're probably eating too many carbohydrates. But I just want to be cautious because right now, carbs are like evil. It is like the consensus among the loudest screaming nutrition people. Like everyone's into keto and high fat, low carb. And not to say that can't work for people, but it definitely does not work for everyone. So finding the macronutrient ratio that works for you and your unique body can be really helpful. So anything you want to add to that, Stacey?
Yeah, no, you're spot on. I think ketogenic diet is like all the rage.
It's everywhere. Even checking out at the grocery store, it's like keto on all the magazines. I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yes. But it's like you said, it's not for everyone. It really is not going to work. I mean, pay attention to your body, because if you've been doing it for a month and a half, and you don't feel good and you have no energy, then, rather than just continuously trying to change something, I know on social media, there's like, oh, do this. Like, everyone has a reason or an answer why it's not working for you. But the answer could be that it is not the right diet for you. And I would say stop trying at that point. Also, find out what test your blood levels of cholesterol, your triglycerides, your blood sugar and insulin, because when those numbers are going off because you're on the ketogenic diet, that's another sign that this is just not working for you. My last point with regards to either playing around with macronutrients or, going to one of these sort of extreme diets like ketogenic or even veganism, is that you could make any of these diets healthy, or you could make them very unhealthy. So someone will be on a vegan diet and they'll be living on just pasta.
I know. I call it junk food.
Healthy.
Junk food vegan.
Right. And then there's this thing called the dirty ketogenic diet or something, where it's like, you choose the most highly saturated fats of all, and you don't eat any fiber at all. And it's so please be careful about where you're getting this type of information and who you're listening to. And remember that, just as we've already talked about, you are a very unique person, and what works for other people may not work for you.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because even with the gluten-free thing, like a lot of times people are like, oh, it's gluten-free, so it's healthy. And it's this hyper-processed thing, which probably will spike your insulin more than the gluten-containing one. So it's just, you really have to kind of put all of those aside, those food marketing things that you hear, and just educate yourself, work with someone who knows what they're talking about, all of that, versus just, going on a fad diet and assuming it's healthy. So helping to figure out, what works best for you in a healthy, balanced way.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that was a really great list of all the underlying reasons why calories in, calories out is just not the only answer to losing weight. I wanted to play our intro at the end because I had a technical issue before, but just so that you guys hear our names and kind of know where you can find us. But we're excited about, continuing this podcast, and check us out on social media and our websites. I am Stacey Seslowski at healfromfood.com. And do you want to let people know where you are?
Yeah, and I am Leah Grace Barrick at gracefunctionalnutrition.com.
Awesome. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Welcome to the Power of Food podcast. We are so excited to bring you evidence-based nutrition information focusing on addressing the root cause for imbalance. Food has the power to help you achieve lifelong optimal health without the side effects of prescription medication. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcast platform. I am Stacey Seslowski, functional nutrition registered dietitian.
And I am Leah Grace Barrick, functional nutritionist.